Good morning or good afternoon. Happy Monday, whatever it is. What time? What day is it? I don't know. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Communication 24/7 podcast, where we communicate about how we communicate. I am your host, Jennifer Furlong. Today, I have a very special guest, Mr. Thomas Wu. Mr. Thomas Wu is the quote pack leader at Coyote Inc. So, we're going to talk about that in a few moments. But the reason I asked Thomas on the show today, because y'all know that my wheelhouse is internal communication. I like to go into organizations and I talk to the workforce about improving their communication skills and establishing stronger relationships and maintaining those relationships and how to adapt to different scenarios and crisis communication, all that good stuff. My wheelhouse is not in the marketing realm, and that would fall under the more along the lines of the external communication area, in my view. So I wanted to have an expert come into the studio today to talk to us not only about marketing and branding, but also Thomas is a personal friend of mine, someone whom I have come to rely on somewhat for a lot of emotional support when it comes to being a small business owner and all the craziness that comes along with being a small business owner and a podcast host and all of those things, because he also does all of that. And that's something else that we're going to talk about today. So, Thomas, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm super excited about having this conversation. What about you? I hope so.
Stoked to be here. Very nervous, but thank you for inviting me and also for your very kind words.
Oh, thank you. Now, um, Thomas has over 20 years experience as a brand strategist. So he says he's nervous, but I guarantee you he has the knowledge. He's got the know-how to back up everything that we're going to talk about. So the pressure is just mounting. Is that correct? It might just keep laying
Absolutely,
it,
yes.
just laying it on there more and more. All right. So, anyone who is listening to the live stream, as of right now, we are live on Facebook as well as LinkedIn and the Communication 24/7 YouTube channel. So, please remember, we would love to have your comments, your questions. Please feel free to be a part of the show. That actually brings a nice little element, to the live stream. So, don't be shy about that. All right, Thomas, let's get going, because
Yes,
I have so many things that I want to talk to you about. Like I said, the marketing and the branding and all of that stuff, for small business owners, that's one reason for having this conversation. But the other reason is also just some of the internal stuff that you and I have also had a lot of conversations about with being a small business owner and all the craziness and challenges that entails. So, before we get to all of that, could you please just spend a couple of minutes explaining to the audience about Coyote Inc.? How did that come about? And also, Coyote, by the way, is not spelled like how y'all are thinking. So I'm going to ask Thomas to also explain the spelling of Coyote and the ideas and all of that stuff. So just kind of give us the 411 on everything Coyote Inc.
So Coyote is spelled Koyoti, and I will get to the reason of the spelling in a little bit, I suppose. One of a few of the reasons why I chose the name Coyote, one was quite honestly, I didn't want it to call it, ABC marketing or what have you.
Right.
And so I was thinking about all the different possibilities that I could use. And one that I came across, and one thing was my love of stories, is the story of Old Man Coyote in North American folklore. He is Old Man Coyote is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, animal people on the planet, and he is sort of the Prometheus of of North American folklore.
Mm.
And But more importantly, the physiological traits of coyote. Coyotes are the most successful wild animal in North America. They exist anywhere from the Yucatan Peninsula all the way up to the Arctic Circle. They'll go into towns and villages and cities where even larger animals won't go. They will hunt prey for upwards of 20 hours, if not more. And while they are known to hunt alone, they will also hunt in packs as well. So all of these are things that I think that every small business needs. A little bit of courage, being able to communicate, being able to collaborate, being able to be curious. Um, all of these things, having that motivation, continuous drive, all of these things are things that small businesses need. And so I felt that there was a pull there to incorporate kind of both sides of this, and more kind of with the story side. In Warner Brothers, Wile E. Coyote is also based on this character of Old Man Coyote, where he's very clever, but he's very smart, but at the same time he can be too clever for his own good and ends up blowing himself up. So and so again, as much as we want to be clever and we want to be facetious and we want to be, we want to joke around and stuff like that, there are lessons to be learned that we might be too clever for our own good. And so just always, stay grounded and take a step back and see if it's that cleverness is actually the right way to go, because it's not always in the box or outside the box.
Mm.
There's not really any box. It just depends on where the situation calls for.
I love that. I have never heard you tell that story before, the beginning of Coyote and why it is that you chose that. I'm fascinated. That is amazing. And I love, you're right, Wile E. Coyote, he does try to make it a little too complicated sometimes. And I love that, when you also think about it, though, he doesn't give up. Like,
Yeah.
even when he screws up royally, he's like, okay, literally going back to the drawing board. You'll see him do that sometimes, and he comes up with some other elaborate scheme, but he doesn't give up. And I know sometimes as a small business owner, not even sometimes, it probably, like, at some point every single day, I probably throw my arms up and get so frustrated at some aspect of being a small business owner, whether it's, the trying to get through the emails, or we have the pressure to stay up on the social media, or I'm trying to figure out who can I call to drum up some more interest, and just the list goes on and on and on. So I really love that connection with coyotes, and then talking about Wile E. Coyote as well. So you had a pretty in-depth thought process when you were thinking about your own small business and the characteristics of coyotes and the lore behind the storytelling, in order for you to figure out what it was that you wanted to symbolize your small
Mhm.
business. Um, for anyone who is embarking as a small business owner and they're kind of starting from the very beginning, what can they do in order to try to jumpstart that process? Do you have any tools or tricks that you used in order to think about, how can I arrive at this understanding of what is the symbol, or what is the character, or, what is the story that it is that I'm trying to tell as I'm choosing uh, my logo, or the name of my company, whatever it is.
When it comes to names, I think it really is something that needs to speak to you.
Mhm.
Um, and there's nothing wrong with using your own name as a business. It just depends on how far forward you're thinking about it. I mean,
Mm.
if you think about Hewlett Packard, HP, it's based on two people's names,
Mhm.
right? So there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But in terms of what you're trying to achieve, in terms of what moving forward, how big you hope to grow, or different businesses that you hope to get into, how will that name kind of work in all those different areas?
Mm.
And so it really depends on that. And then after that, if the meaning of the name speaks to you, and does it speak to the industry that you're trying to get into?
Mm, yeah. Do you recommend anyone kind of doing a, I don't know, maybe like a little focus group or just kind of asking close friends and families, what do you think about this name? What do you think? I'm starting a business and kind of getting their input. Do you think that is more helpful? Or do you think sometimes if you're asking people who are not necessarily business owners, they're not in the industry themselves, maybe that could do more harm than good? What are your thoughts on that?
As you know, my answer to almost everything is it depends.
Yes, I knew that was
It
coming.
there are pros and cons to everything, and there are pros in terms of asking around and seeing if things resonate with other people, definitely.
Mhm,
But at the same time, you can also end up with too many cooks in the kitchen, and you can also
mhm,
end up with you questioning yourself whether or not this is, you might be persuaded otherwise. And opinions are great, but opinions are simply that, opinions. So
mm.
it really is, at the end of the day, it's taking those opinions and formulating your own.
Right, right. I just want to take a moment. Dr. Brian Grossman said good morning in the chat, and Mark said hello, Jen and Thomas. So good to see you, Mark. Remember, ask any questions or continue to make comments so y'all can be a part of the show as well. Um, so, Thomas, one of the things that one of the reasons why I wanted us to have this conversation is I realized in my own journey creating my own small business, and it's only been about a year and a half since I started Communication 24/7. Had no idea what in the heck I was doing. And then I decided I was going to start a podcast, had no idea what in the heck I was doing with that. One of the things, though, that was such an incredibly pleasant surprise was when I finally got around to joining some groups, and you and I just, I think by chance, we happened to meet in one of I think it was a Facebook podcasting group. And so we just so happened to be able to, we met in that way. And then I ended up joining another group that you were a part of, a business minded group. And then the podcasting group, I ended up joining that. And it really has made such a huge impact for me, personally as a small business owner, because it can be such an incredibly confusing, challenging, and lonely existence, when you're trying to go out there on your own. So, that's why I wanted to talk with you specifically on this show today, because I wanted us to have a conversation so that other business owners can understand the value of getting out there, joining groups, just being open to having conversations and opening yourself, to others so that you can receive that support, and even the support that you may not necessarily know that you need right now. What was it like for you? Because I know you have a history of being a business owner. Like you've kind of done things before even Coyote Inc., right?
Mhm.
When did that happen for you, though? When did you realize that it was going to be a bonus for you to actually go out there, do more networking, and try to just create your tribe, find a sense of community with other business owners? Was that always in the plan for you, or did you also stumble upon it like I did?
I started networking when I was in college. I was really
Mm,
early. I was part of the American Marketing Association, and we had decided to put together a networking event.
Mm.
And networking came fairly easy to me. I always liked hearing people's stories because I'm all about stories, right? So I always liked hearing people's stories. So they offered me an opportunity to join a local networking group for American Marketing Association. And so we also decided on from a collegiate level that that was what we were going to do. And at the time, I was in my second year, and we put this event on. There were 300 guests, both from professional and collegiate level. And I had MBA students come up to me, a second year, know nothing. What am I supposed to do here? And it just blew me away that, you know, there are a lot of people who are out there who have been in business, who have been in the industry for ages and ages that didn't know about networking.
Mm.
And so it kind of, at that early age, it kind of made me want to do that more, because it made me feel like, oh, I was maybe, you know, I felt mature doing it, right?
Yeah.
When you're when you're a young kid. But what I learned quickly was that you don't know where those relationships will take you.
Mm.
And the people that you network with, or the people that I networked with, I never went into any networking group with any intention other than to listen to some great stories and see if there's anybody that I connect with. And
Mm.
so because the thing is, organically from that, you don't know if the people you meet will become friends, will become, a future partner. I met my wife networking. There was, you don't know if they're going to be collaborators, they're going to be clients, they're going to be suppliers. You just don't know, or if somebody they know is going to be that. So it's just a matter of, for me, at the very least, at that time, was getting out there and just hear some great stories. And if there's people that you connect with, keep connecting.
Yeah. Yeah. It has made such a huge impact on me. And I if I can say a good thing that has come out of COVID, I don't know. That's kind of like a weird statement to make, but COVID kind of forced even more and more people online. And a lot of the networking events that used to be strictly face to face, they had no choice but to go online. And that kind of opened up so many possibilities for a lot of people like myself. I know it's hard to believe, but I am a big time introvert. It's very, very difficult for me to go into a networking event and feel confident. I can fake it for a little bit, but I'm scared to death when I walk into, if it's a huge hall, a huge room, and it's full of people and I don't know anybody there. I find that incredibly daunting. And the last face to face networking event that I went to where I didn't know anybody, I almost left. I went in and there were over 100 people gathered around, and I could tell everybody had already met each other at some point. So there were people gathered together talking, and I got those butterflies in the pit of my stomach, and I started sweating a little bit. I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So I went to the restroom and just kind of like got my thoughts together. And then I decided, you know what? I'm not here. I'm not going to try to sell anything. I'm not trying to market anything. I just let me meet one person. And so what I did is I walked in and I scanned the room and I found one person sitting alone at a table, not having any conversations with anybody, looking just as miserable as I felt. So that's when I was like, that's who I'm going to go have a conversation with. And just like you said, I just approached it with that mindset of, I'm just going to get to know who this person is. Obviously they're here alone like I am. So let me just kind of learn their story, figure out who they are, and see where that goes. And that made such a huge difference. I felt the release. I didn't feel all of this pressure to perform,
Mhm,
if you
mhm.
will. So I think that is just some fantastic advice, that perception that you have of going in and just wanting to learn, about others in any type of event. Brenda is saying hi from Detroit, and she and her dog are enjoying the fall weather on the back deck. I'm a little envious of you there, Brenda. And then Mark, he wants to add that the key to effective networking is getting over the fear of meeting new people and just being yourself. Yeah, that's actually sometimes, though, for us introverts, Mark, that's easier said than done, because then you get it in your head. But what if they don't like who I am, right? Or what if they don't like what I'm saying?
If I may, the one thing really nice thing about networking events is that people are there to talk to new people.
Right. Yeah.
So they're open and willing to speak, as
Yeah.
opposed to, if it's entirely different if you're at a networking event and you will go up to a random stranger and you say, hi, what's your name? Or as opposed to going up to somebody in the middle of the street and saying, hi, what's your name? Right.
What do you
They're
do?
there. Exactly. Right. They're there at the networking event to meet people just the
Yeah.
same as you are, just the same as I am. And so, and also the number one topic that people like talking about is themselves.
Hmm.
So if
Hmm.
you ask them about themselves, you'll very quickly realize that, hey, there's a conversation there that is just, wanting to come out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And practice those good listening skills, which I preach about all the time. This really, becoming a business owner forced me to practice some of the communication skills that maybe had gotten a little rusty, myself, because it's really easy as a professor. You don't have to go out and meet too many new people. I mean, the students that you meet every semester, you have a brand new class. They're an audience that has been picked for you, and they have no choice but to be there. So you don't really have to work that hard to get to know them. It's a completely different ball game as a small business owner. So Larry is on Facebook, and he has a question. Do either of you have a preference for networking? What I mean by that is, do you find it easier to join smaller groups or go through the rigmarole? Love that word, Larry. Rigmarole of a large networking event. I hate elevator speech at a networking event. If it's just to cover the room, I don't feel as though their relationship is built there, but more so follow on conversations. Yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about. Be there for the conversations. And then a follow up question: when is it not considered too forward to put a small group together specifically for networking? Okay, and I guess it was a long comment, so it kind of cut it off right here. So I guess preference for networking, large versus small networking events. What do you think, Thomas?
It depends. um,
And I will
big,
say, I agree.
big networking events are great, where in which you can meet a lot of different people of a lot of
Mhm.
different
Mhm.
backgrounds. And yes, the networking event is there to kind of qualify people that you want to have a further conversation with.
Mhm.
So exchanging cards, information, things of that nature, and then following up and saying, hey, I had a great conversation. I wanted to hear more about yada, yada, yada. Small networking groups, those are, you're better able to form uh, tighter connections more quickly, because there
Mhm.
is then time for that to develop a little bit, but still it's about that follow up. So it depends on what your purpose is. If you want, you don't need a very large audience. You don't need to talk to a lot of people. The difference between, say, for example, uh, you, Jen, because your clientele is very specific.
Mhm.
You don't need a whole swath of people to speak with.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're, say, for example, a realtor, then you want to speak to as many people as possible. So it depends on that as well. And it depends on also where you feel more comfortable.
Mhm.
When it comes to networking, you do want to be present. You do want to
Mhm.
be we are putting on that armor, we are putting on that mask, so that in that short period of time when we are speaking with people, that they're getting the best of us and they do want to speak with us further. But at the same time, it really is about, how do I do that authentically? right?
Mhm.
And I don't really believe in elevator pitches. Um, because that 7 seconds and you need to blab something out that's cogent and coherent. It's very difficult. But if
Mhm.
you're able to, if you understand your why and you understand where you're a little bit different and you're able to just lean into that, then that becomes your elevator pitch, because and that becomes easy because you're just talking about what you believe in.
Mhm. Yeah. So, strategy. The
Mm,
strategy never ends. You gotta think about, why is it that I want to attend this networking event to begin with? What is it that I'm hoping to get out of it? And I don't have to meet everybody that's in the room. I just need to identify. And if I can understand what it is that I'm hoping to get out of that event, then that can help guide me. Do I just want to uh, make contact with two or three people, or do I need to just have like 150 cards at the ready and I just want to make sure I shower the room with all of my
right.
information? um
And again,
so
pros and cons with both
mhm.
of that, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I guess it's what it depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve. So I want to bring this back to the branding concept. um how how do you make sure that when you are meeting people, and and I'm thinking about in the small groups that you and I belong to, and we have a lot of conversations with a lot of really interesting um small business owners, or people who are in the creative space, whether they are writers or podcasters, or they make videos, whatever it is. um how important is it that you're constantly thinking about your brand while you're engaged in these conversations? And whether it's a networking event, or if it's just, some of the organizations that we belong to together, are you
Mhm.
are you always cognizant of your brand while you're engaging in these conversations?
Yes and no. So, I have an ardent belief that branding happens at every point of contact,
Mhm.
regardless of what it is that we do. Quite often, I'll tell the story of a dentist. If you don't mind, I'll very quickly.
Mhm.
If you know a dentist, and even though you meet this dentist socially, every single time you meet this dentist, they're drunk off of their rear ends. And
Mhm.
while they might be very good at what they do in their practice, knowing that they're drunk off their rear end socially every single time you've seen them, how likely are you going to be using this dentist when
Mhm.
it comes time for your root canal, right? And inadvertently and unknowingly, this dentist has tarnished their brand.
Mhm.
So, regardless of where it is that we are going, what it is that we're doing, we are actually, in effect, branding ourselves,
Mhm.
or perpetuating that brand. So, do I do it? Like, am I conscious of that effort?
Mhm.
Not really, because I'm just being who I am and being authentic to that.
Okay.
Because the people that I want to attract are the people who are okay with that, right?
Mhm.
If you're just, kind of like if you're dating, and I've been out of the dating world and for a while now, but when you're dating, and you that first couple of dates, if you're trying to be somebody that you're not, people will very quickly realize that you're not that person. We can all be somebody else for 7 minutes, 10 minutes,
Mhm.
but
Right.
eventually they will find out who it is that you are. And if you're going to a networking event that especially these online ones that happen maybe weekly or monthly, and you're consistently there, people will find out if you're not being authentic,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So it's I don't know if you can consciously be yourself,
Mhm.
but it's just
Right.
being your authentic self.
Right. Okay. So, and the reason I ask that is, I know that all too often people will join different groups and they feel like they have to be a certain version of themselves in order to maybe, fit whatever it is that they are perceiving the expectations are,
Mhm.
in order to be a part of that group. And sometimes I like that you're saying, that branding does happen at every point of contact. And going back to what you were saying earlier at the very start of our conversation, thinking about your why and thinking about what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then letting your values, whatever it is that is guiding you, that's going to be how I think you should present yourself at all times, because that's obviously who you are. I know a lot of people will have debates about, are you the brand or is your company the brand?
Mhm.
What do you think about that? Because I've heard that um, often, that
Mhm.
you have to think about yourself as the brand, but then if you have a business, you also have to think about your business as the brand.
Right. So when you're a very small company, a solopreneur,
Hmm.
you and your brand are synonymous.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way for you to be one way as yourself and be another way
Hmm.
as a company, because
Hmm.
it's just you. As your company grows, it becomes it'll develop in its own way and it'll mature in its own way. But those core values and that mission statement is still dictated by you.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people, if you are clear on your brand, you're clear on your why, your unique value proposition, and the people that you want to speak to and speak with,
Hmm.
invariably the people that you attract to be a part of your team
Hmm.
are going to be reflective of that as well.
Okay. Okay.
So as your company grows, yes, it'll develop an entity of its own,
Hmm.
but a lot of that is being molded by you in
Hmm.
the background.
So if you're a solopreneur, you recommend you need to write down your mission statement and have your core values and all of that. Do you recommend, like, they need to write that out now, like have it somewhere in a document, just take the time to really figure that out now? Or do you think they could, oh, let's just be lazy about this and we'll just wait until I think I might start growing?
I think it's something, if you are able to articulate that at an early stage,
Mhm.
fantastic.
Mm.
But a lot of times with small businesses, especially new businesses, they will find that over time. They will find what they end up leaning into later on. There might be a focus. You know what? I want to help, for example, for yourself, I want to help all companies communicate better. But
Mhm.
eventually, as you start doing things, you'll find that you start attracting a certain type of clientele, and
Mhm.
you'll say, you know what, I want to help people in legal services more. I
Right.
want to help
Right.
people who are, inter-team communications more, and things of
Mhm.
that nature, and things that'll change kind of as we go along and we learn more about ourselves, we learn more
Mhm.
about our company. And so that mission statement might adjust to that as we start growing. So I wouldn't say yes, I would say yes, have it in mind, but at the same time be open to it to um to mature as well.
Yeah. I am so glad to hear you say that, because I am actually in the middle of that right now. And I know a lot of other small business owners have gotten to this point as well, where you feel this pressure like, oh, I have to have all of this figured out now, don't I? Like, I need to know exactly what I'm doing, where I'm going. And um, am I allowed to pivot? Am I allowed to change? Am I allowed, once I get things going, what happens if I find that I want to go in a different direction? So it sounds like you're saying that's actually a good thing. If you find yourself narrowing down your focus and becoming clearer, you're experiencing different clients and you're working with different people, and it's helping you over time really narrow down and figure out a focus that you can truly feel passionate about. There's nothing wrong with that. um how does one go about the rebranding then? Or how do you go about making sure that you don't cause more confusion? As say you're a small business owner and you've decided, you know what, I think I do need to pivot slightly. How can I do that in a way that is not going to cause confusion for current clients or, future clients? What do we do?
A lot of that depends on how big you are at that point. Say, for example, you are one of the big fast food chains.
Mm,
Then yes, that rebranding is going to be massive, and it
mm,
goes everywhere from your packaging to maybe some of your menu items to the uniforms to the advertising, and et cetera, et cetera. But as a small company, small changes doesn't need to be end up being huge, and it depends on how much of a change you want to undergo. Because at the same time, when we start talking about leaning into your why, that why is always going to be prevalent. It's
mhm,
always going to be present.
mm,
So regardless of where you want to shift to, it might just be speaking to a slightly different audience. For
mhm,
example, when we started Coyote, we wanted to talk to, doesn't matter if you're big or small.
mm,
We
mhm,
want to help everyone. But as we started moving forward, and with my background and my understanding, and it just more and more became, you know what, I really want to help small businesses, because
mm,
those are the people that I feel that need the most help and aren't getting it. They're the ones that are piecemealed information and need a little bit more information. So that communication changed slightly. I'm still doing the same thing, but who
mhm,
I'm talking to is a little bit different. And so
mm,
it's just about adjusting for that, as opposed to, you know what, I'm going to switch up my logo. I'm going to switch up. And those things can happen as well. But, you know, it really depends on your need at the time for small businesses. Um, I don't think that I don't think that you're going to end up doing a completely 180.
yeah,
It's just gonna be nudges. And
right,
so it just depends on how far you wanna go. But if you are going to be thinking about, regardless if you're branding or rebranding, it it's thinking about kind of further out where you wanna take it. Because, yes, brands can do rebrands every few years, but it's always more expensive to do a rebrand than it is to do it the first time. Because especially if you have inventory, say, for example, you've got a clothing line.
mhm,
And yeah, it might be the same clothes, but you want to start, well, guess what? Now you have to start switching out the hang tags. Well, if you've got the logo on the apparel itself, well, all of that logo, all those garments have to go out of the warehouse, because you're now switching to this new logo. So it can be sweeping. And so that can start getting really pricey.
right, yeah. How far into your business, Coyote Inc., were you when you realized that, you know what, I think I want to start focusing on small businesses rather than everybody?
We've pivoted a couple of times over the years. We started in
Mm,
2014. We started by doing logoed apparel.
mhm,
And after a while, and my background being in branding, brand strategy and brand management, and then also with my experience with small business and my understanding of small business, it started, you know what, we should shift to providing services for smaller businesses. But at the same time, it's like, oh, we don't want to alienate the larger companies.
mhm,
But then as we started moving in that direction, we found that, you know what, we're not even talking to large companies anymore, in which
mhm,
case that turned into another pivot, in which case where we started speaking specifically to small business owners. So there
right,
were a couple of, and so I would say that, you know, we're still transitioning. It's always a
mhm,
transition. And we might end up being, you know what, the next transition might be, you know what, we no longer want to do B2B, B2C, we only want to do B2B, or vice versa.
mhm,
Or it could be,
mhm,
you know what, we want to be specifically in in apparel or not, right? But
Mhm.
that is organic, and that depends on, and our language might change from there.
Right. Yeah. Mark says that he's rebranded himself many times. I find a new client profile to work with and divorce myself from my existing client base until I could develop a reputation for the new thing that I am doing. So that sounds like a case of something that it's not like that doesn't sound like it's a tiny change. That sounds like that is more like a 180 kind of thing, like what you were talking about.
Ish. I mean, you and I know Mark a little bit, and
Yeah,
okay, in
complete
his case, it
industry
was complete
change. Yeah.
industry change. So that's
hmm
entirely different. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. That's a huge undertaking right
Yeah.
there. That's what you're talking about. That could be
Mm,
really costly,
yeah.
when you have to rebrand like that. Um, Dr. Grossman says that he's pivoting from psychology to coaching and training. Is it better to market me as my name, then pivot to a brand that fits my coaching and training focus? Example, drbriangrossman.com versus something like getunstuck.com. That's a really great question because I mean, we know a lot of coaches, right? We know a lot of consultants. And so there can be that confusion that goes back to am I the brand or is my company the brand? What would you say? Because I have both, right? I have communication247.com, and but also people know me as Jennifer Arvin Furlong, which that website is coming to. So, but so what are your thoughts on that?
It depends on where you want to take it. If you want to grow that business to a point where there are other people who are a part of that,
Mhm,
then maybe have creating a company and a brand around that would be
mhm,
more beneficial. But if you're happy with, what, I just really want to do these kind of one-on-ones, and the company being me, then having your own name as your brand is beneficial, because it's there. One of the things that we want to talk when we talk about branding and marketing is what we want to do is remove disconnects.
Right.
So, if we can be more specific, then that's great. And how much more specific can you be than using your own name?
Right.
But it depends on how far you want to take that. If you want, and there are people who you can take that and you can grow with it and you can have an entire teams and stuff like that as well. But that journey is it's easier it's easier for you to grow a brand with a separate name then, because they can get attached to that name, and it's then a part of that, as opposed to them representing you personally at all times.
Mm,
As an
mhm,
example, if you look at kind of Tim Robbins,
mhm.
right, Tony Robbins, sorry,
Yeah.
um, you know, everybody knows his name. So if you're kind of working under him, you're working under his model, and
Right.
regardless of what you're doing, you're representing him,
Mhm,
right? And that works for him because he is such a big character, right? He's
mhm.
such a big personality. But if you want to at some point in time, you want to retire and have the company go on and they still use that name, then it's a little bit easier for them to justify, especially in the coaching world, in the service-based world, to be able to do that. Otherwise, for example, again, you go back to Hewlett Packard, it can still work, but then it's like, okay, well, is Hewlett and Packard still involved, right? And then it's
Right.
like, who do you represent, and why are you representing this? And it becomes a little bit more difficult. It's not that it can't be done. There are tons of companies like that. Johnson and Johnson is a family brand that
Mhm.
it's still around, right? So there's kind of, you can do it either way. But as a small company, I would say it's, if you want to start growing your team and having other people involved, it's a little easier to have a separate brand.
Ah, okay. And you made a really good point because if your plan is to grow and you want to begin having others who might be able to deliver some type of training under your model, of training that you've developed over time. Um, you are somewhat giving up control over how that is being delivered. I mean, you can always tell them, okay, this is my model, these are the steps, this is what I believe in, and this, but at the end of the day, if you have to be able to trust that they're going to go to whoever that client is, whether it's a business or it's an individual, and that they are going to follow that outline that you've set, for them, and that you have to also be able to trust that they're going to represent you, like you said with Tony Robbins. Anybody who operates under his brand, he is having to trust that they are representing him in the way that he wants to be represented. So that's a lot to think about. And the reason I wanted to follow up with that is because Dr. Grossman did say that his goal is speaking and training and standalone courses and coaches under his certification. Um, but I imagine a question that he needs to think about is he going to focus on coaching and training at the organizational level? Like, is he going to go into different businesses and do that? Or is he going to advertise to individuals and try to get them to sign up, for his courses, whether he
Mhm.
does them face to face or online? um, do you think it's a good idea to do a little bit of both, or do you think it's better to really focus in on one or the other?
I think at this stage of the game, if he's just getting started, there's no harm in doing both. But
Hmm.
because it's also now when we're talking about, um, you know, in the digital world, we can have addresses point left, right, and center,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
Hmm.
right now, jenfurlong.com might be redirected to communication247.com,
Right, right.
right? So
Mm,
you can do that, or vice versa. So you don't have to choose like right at this moment. It also depends on also where you are in terms of your authority.
mm,
If you are already a trusted figure in that industry and people want you specifically,
mhm,
then it's more, you know what, let's lead people to you. And then
mhm,
if you do want to develop a name out of that, then to kind of nudge them that way later on and start nudging them more towards the name. Um,
mhm.
rather, but if you are just getting started, it depends on where your authority is as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Mark said something about, yeah, exit strategy. So say a little. I've heard you on your podcast. You've talked about, also think about the ending. Have your plan, have your ending in mind as well. So say a little bit about that, about the exit strategy. Why is that important?
Well, I brought on a guest to talk about exit strategy, so
Yeah.
definitely not an expert in it,
Yeah.
but definitely like if we are at some point in time, we need to walk away from our career.
Mm,
We might do that willingly. It might be taken from us.
mhm,
Time might not be on our side for whatever reason.
mm,
But if we have a plan in place, then that transition can be a little bit more smooth. So in talking about exit strategies, in terms of our name, in terms of the company name, especially if we are trying to back ourselves away from the business because we're nearing, say, for example, the age of retirement, and there are other people who's going to be taking the reins of the company. But if you are always the person that people speak to, then it's going to be when people are calling, they're going to be calling, if the company's for jenfurlong.com, they're going to be calling, hey, I'd like to speak with Jen.
mm, mhm.
Oh, Jen's not here anymore. Oh, who am I supposed to speak with? Then again, there's that disconnect, and that's what we
Right.
want to alleviate. So if the benefit of having a company name, then
Mhm.
it's, oh, who's a person in charge, or who's in charge
Right.
of sales, or who's in charge of what have you, and they can speak to that person. So
Right.
it does depend on that exit strategy as well.
Wow, that's a lot to think about because if you are in a position where you've developed a new model or you've developed some type of a certification program and it has gotten really popular, in a certain industry, um, that's a lot to think about because, like what Dr. Grossman was talking about, if he wanted to be able to offer a program with his own type of certification, if he uses his name as the business name versus coming up with, getunstuck.com, I imagine at the end of that, it's going to be a lot easier, especially if that particular program becomes really, really popular. Then you might have the option to talk about other I guess, investors, if you will. I don't know, or somebody else wanting to take over that program or someone wanting to buy that program, or, it just seems like you might have a little more flexibility in continuing on, even if you're not going to be the one specifically in charge. You might be able to create some type of agreement where, yeah, they kind of carry on, they carry the flag for you.
Yeah.
Um,
But I mean,
Wanting to work with you.
if it is a certification process, then
Mhm.
again, I mean, again, it depends on, for example, and every industry is a little bit different.
Yeah.
If
Mhm.
Dr. Grossman is well known in his industry and
Mhm.
Dr. Grossman's methods are proven,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Then there is a benefit to maintaining Dr. Grossman's name to the
Right.
certification process, right?
Right. Yes. The Dr. Grossman certification program, or yeah.
Right, right. So
And he says, "How cool, one day Tony Robbins will buy me out." I hope so. I hope so. That would be awesome. And then Brenda says something, if there's negative PR against that person, the brand is devalued. So
yes.
going back to, how large you get, and if you're deciding on bringing on additional people, I guess you really do have to think about anything that could happen. And I don't know, what do you think about that? Everybody is online, right? We all have social media accounts. Um, do you recommend, if you decide you might want to partner with someone, or you decide, in some way create some type of an agreement, should you scour the internet and make that decision? Like, how far down the internet rabbit hole should you be willing to go in order to make a decision? And if there is something questionable out there, um, I guess, is there a line that you would recommend that a business owner draw, or is it just purely based on your own values and you just have to be willing to, as long as they fit within your values, it should be fine? I mean, what do you
In
think
terms
about
of
that?
partnerships?
Yeah, yeah, like what Brenda was saying, if somebody else, if you're bringing in somebody
Mm, mhm,
to, I guess they're going to be representing your brand, if
mhm.
you will, and if they end up having negative PR, against them, you're gonna have a lot of cleanup that you're
Right,
gonna have to do. Um, but, everybody is also on social media and everybody has different opinions.
right.
How concerned do you think people should be about that aspect of it? I mean, I know you're not a crisis communication person. That's going to be, actually, I do have a crisis communication person coming up soon, but it is, I'm sure, a concern from a branding standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, whoever you have representing you have to be mindful of those things.
Mhm. So, again, branding happens at every point of contact, and
Yep,
I keep
yep,
coming back
yep.
to that, right? So,
Mhm,
yes, that person's going to be, and whomever it is that you work with is going to be representative of that brand.
mhm,
So what you do want to make sure absolutely is that they align with your values, yes,
mhm,
but at the same time is there's trust involved as well, regardless of who we become friends with, who we end up dating, marrying, having partnerships with, and how far those relationships go. There's always that level of trust and a little bit of give in terms of that as well. We're whomever it is that we're bringing on and who are collaborating with, they're not you, they're not me, they have their own, entity. We can't expect that they're going to be a clone of ourselves.
Right.
So they're going to bring in whatever it is that they, and so long as you're comfortable with who they represent and those values are the same, and there is always a risk of when you're bringing other people into your team and into your fold, regardless if it is business or personal.
Right. Right. This has been such an amazing conversation. I can't believe we've already been going for almost an hour now, just having this conversation with you. And I have so many other questions we haven't even been able to get to. I do have actually two more questions. So,
Mhm.
I know there are a lot of people who have taken this opportunity, in this pandemic life that we've been living the past couple of years to start their own business. There's a lot of small businesses that have been started over the past couple of years. Um, just from your experience of being an entrepreneur, what would be one or maybe two pieces of advice that you've learned along the way that you're like, man, if I could go back and redo this again, this would be like the number one and number two things that I think I should have known. If I could have known then what I know now, it would have made my life so much easier. What would be those two things?
I think the biggest one for me, at the very least, is time. That I was I was one of those people who needed a zero inbox every day.
Mm.
I needed to go through every
Yeah,
single inbox,
I don't
every single
feel the
email, and yeah. So and so if it took me to 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., midnight to get everything done, then I
Mm,
would. And so it would take, and sometimes I would work into the wee hours of the day. And sometimes, depending on the industry, say for example, if you're doing tax, if you're helping people do taxes, those tax season is going to be crunch time for you. If
right.
you're a florist, Valentine's Day is your Christmas, and you're going to be working crazy hours. That comes with the territory. But for as much as possible, that we really need to respect our own time and carve out times for things, and understand that the world's not going to end if some. So in order to get to that zero inbox, maybe it's just, what, respond quickly and saying, what, I will respond to you tomorrow, or
Mm,
what have you, and just setting. But if, as long as people have realistic expectations of what to expect from you, then most people will be okay with it. And very seldom are there any fires that need to be put out. And
right.
so respect that time so that you have that time for yourself, for your family, for your sleep, so that you don't end up like me.
I trust me, I know exactly what you're talking about, and we have a lot of conversations about time, and how do we can't create more time. Every single one of us is given the exact same amount of minutes every single day. So I think that's such an incredibly important piece of advice that you have right there. Is think about the time that it's going to take, and how it may change depending on the season, but really just guard that time jealously, and don't be afraid to I guess my piece of advice would be, don't be afraid to let other people know that, look, as soon as I you send me an email, it could sit there for 24 hours. So don't email me again 2 hours later to make sure, did you open my email yet? Because that's just going to piss me off even more, right? It's just going to be, irritating. So don't be afraid to set those standards, I guess it's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So how do we get in touch with you? Like I said, I have 1,000 more questions, so we'll do this again. We'll set up a time so I can
Anytime.
pick your brain. Yeah,
Yeah.
braining more. So, how do we get in contact with you?
Coyote.com, www.koyoti.com. And I never got into how it ended up with that spelling. So very quickly, it's pretty much eats meets west. I'm for those of you looking at me can't tell I'm Chinese and Asian. So I kind of just twisted it around so that I embrace that east meets west portion within myself. So kind of almost a Japanese kind of version of the way how it would be spelled. So I kind of twisted that around. So coyote.com or info@coyote.com or even thomas@coyote.com is the best way to reach me.
Excellent. So we will have all of that information in the show notes. Make sure that you can easily access it so you can just click on it. Thank you so much, Mark. Yeah, also don't have to wear every hat to do the parts that you're good at and hire. Well, that'll be another conversation. How do we hire people when we don't have the money to hire people? And, Autumn says, so amazing and valuable. Thank you so much. Glad you enjoyed it, Autumn. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And then final, Dr. Grossman, or join Jen Furlong and be unstoppable. Yes, thank
Absolutely.
you. All right, everyone. I hope you got some valuable information. As always, that's why we're here. Want to make sure that anything that is connected to communication, that's why I wanted to bring in Thomas today so that we can have a little bit of a different perspective. Because, like I said, this is not my wheelhouse. I hope everyone has enjoyed the conversation. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your Monday. And I guess everybody take care. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye now. Thank you.